The sign was written in marker on the back of a cereal box. Dog for sale. $10. Please give him a good home. The old German shepherd sitting beside it didn't move when the two men got close. He didn't bark. He just stood, slow and deliberate, and placed himself between them and the woman crouching against the wall. She was shaking. The dog was not. When Emily Brooks stepped out of the parking garage and saw it, the men, the woman, the dog holding a line no one had drawn, something in her went very still. "Take one more step," she said quietly. Neither man expected that voice. Neither did anyone else on that street. If this story has you hooked already, follow along, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning had started the way most of Emily Brooks' mornings started. Slightly behind, slightly under-caffeinated, and with a 12-hour shift waiting at the other end of it. She'd grabbed her bag from the passenger seat, locked the car by muscle memory, and was cutting through the lower level of the Hargrove Street parking structure when she heard it. Not the sign. She didn't see that until later. What she heard first was a dog. One low warning sound, not a bark, more like a boundary being announced. And then the unmistakable texture of two male voices doing the thing men do when they've decided something belongs to them. Emily slowed without stopping. She came around the pillar and took it all in about 2 seconds. A woman, mid-50s, maybe older. Gray coat that had seen too many winters. She was pressed against the exterior wall where the parking structure opened onto Calloway Street. Her knees bent, a canvas bag clutched to her chest, eyes fixed on the ground the way people look when they're trying to disappear. Beside her, sitting so close his flank touched her leg, was the dog. German shepherd, older. The kind of old you could read in the gray around his muzzle and the stiffness in his back haunches when he rose. But he rose. That was the thing. He pulled himself up and moved forward just 2 steps and stopped there, squarely between the woman and the two men who'd been leaning in. The sign, the cereal box sign, was propped against the wall near the woman's bag. Emily read it in her peripheral vision without turning her head. The men weren't huge. That wasn't the point. They had the posture of people who'd figured out that most people would look away, and they were correct about most people. One of them had his hand extended, like he was offering something, but his weight was forward, not back. Emily kept walking until she was at a 45-degree angle to both parties, then stopped. "You guys need something?" The closer one turned. He looked at her the way people look at interference. "Mind your business." "I'm trying to," Emily said. "What is it you need?" "Lady has something of ours." Emily glanced at the woman who had still not looked up. The dog had not looked away from the men. "That true?" she asked the woman. The woman's voice was barely sound. "No." "There you go," Emily said. She wasn't loud, she wasn't aggressive, she just wasn't moving. "Have a good one." The second man, taller, jacket with a logo on the chest, shifted his weight and did the thing. He took a step. Not toward Emily. Toward the woman. The dog moved at the same time Emily did. The dog moved faster. He didn't lunge. He didn't snap. He simply stood in the path of the step, all of his remaining weight and whatever authority 12 years of living had given him, and he looked at the man with an expression that was not aggression. It was something older. Certainty. Emily was already beside him. She didn't touch anyone. She just existed at a proximity that made continuation expensive. "I'd let that go," she said to the taller man. Her voice was flat, reasonable. The flatness was the thing. It wasn't the flatness of someone trying to sound calm. It was the flatness of someone for whom calm was the factory setting. Something about it landed. The men exchanged a look. The closer one made a sound, half dismissal, half retreat. And they walked, not ran, back up the ramp toward the street. Emily watched them go. The dog watched them go. When they rounded the corner and disappeared, the dog sat. Not relaxed, just downgraded. Emily crouched down. "Hey!" She was looking at the woman, not the dog. "You okay?" The woman finally looked up. Her eyes were brown and exhausted, and she had the particular look of someone who had been okay for so many years that not okay had come as a genuine shock. "I'm sorry," she said, which was the wrong answer but the human one. "Don't be." I'm Emily. She paused. What's his name? The woman looked at the dog. Something moved across her face. Ranger. Ranger, still seated, turned his head and looked at Emily with the particular attention of an animal deciding something. Whatever he decided seemed to be fine. He didn't lean into her hand when she extended it. He just let her touch the side of his face, which felt like a different kind of permission. He's beautiful, Emily said, and meant it. The gray muzzle, the careful eyes. Beautiful in the way things are when they've lasted. He's 11, the woman said. Technically, the sign. I put the sign up because... She stopped, started again. I can't... Where I'm going, they won't let me bring him, and I can't... She pressed her lips together. I can't leave him with just anyone, but I can't keep him either. I've been sitting here 3 hours and I can't... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Emily looked at the sign again. $10. She looked at Ranger, who was watching her back with that unblinking, patient attention. Are you hungry? Emily asked. Both of you. The diner on the corner of Callaway and Merritt had a small patio, technically closed for the season but not yet cleared, and the woman behind the counter, Deb, according to her name tag, took one look at the situation and said nothing about the dog. The woman's name was Olivia Carter. She'd lived in Ashford Bay for 31 years, which was longer than Emily had been alive. She'd grown up in her parents' house on the lake, Whitmore Lake, out past the ridge on the east side of town, and had moved back to care for her mother when the cancer came, and had stayed after because the house was hers and the lake was hers, and it had never occurred to her that those things were the kind of things that could be taken. Emily ordered coffee and eggs for both of them and listened. She was a good listener. It was one of the things nobody at Mercy General credited her for, because listening didn't make noise, and the things that made noise were what people noticed. Olivia talked between bites, and the picture that emerged was this. Her mother had died 14 months ago. The estate was straightforward, single property, sole heir, clear title going back decades. But 3 months after the death, Olivia had received a notice from something called Crestline Property Holdings, informing her that a transfer of deed had been recorded in the county register's office, and that she had 30 days to vacate. I thought it was a mistake, Olivia said. Obviously, I called the county office. They said the transfer was valid. They said it was signed. She pulled a piece of egg apart with her fork and didn't eat it. My mother's signature, she dated 6 weeks before she died. Was she... She was on hospice. Olivia's voice didn't waver. It was the waverless quality of someone who had already cried until it stopped working. She couldn't hold a pen. She couldn't sit up without help. She looked at Emily. I have medical records. I have nurses' notes. I have everything. But the county said the signature is valid and the transfer is recorded, and unless I can prove fraud in civil court, you need a lawyer. I had one. He withdrew from the case. So did the second one. Something crossed her face. Crestline is... They have a lot of money, and they have people in this city, and everyone I've talked to has told me to let it go. Take the offer. They'll give me $60,000 in 30 days. For lakefront property, the assessor's value is $900,000. Emily was quiet for a moment. Outside, Ranger sat on the patio stones and watched the street with the same professional attention he'd had in the parking structure. How long have you been out of the house? Emily asked. They changed the locks 3 weeks ago. Olivia looked at the table. I have a friend from church. She let me stay for a while, but her landlord... She stopped on the word church and moved around it. She's in an apartment. It didn't work out. Emily looked at her watch. Her shift started in 40 minutes. She would be late, which Dr. Marcus Hale would note with the particular sighing precision he reserved for her specifically. She looked at Ranger through the window. He had moved, she realized. While she'd been watching Olivia, Ranger had repositioned himself so that he was angled toward them. Watching. Still on duty at 11 years old for a person who was trying to sell him for $10 to keep him safe. Do you have the documents? Emily asked. The transfer notice, whatever they sent you? In my bag. I have everything. Olivia looked up. Why? Because I want to look at them. She paused. I have a place. Guest room, actual bed. The dog's fine. Come tonight after my shift. We can go through what you have. Olivia stared at her. You don't know me. I know Ranger vouched for you, Emily said. That's enough for tonight. Mercy. General Hospital was 7 blocks from the diner, and Emily walked it at a pace that most of her colleagues would have called a controlled jog. She was 3 minutes late to the floor, which meant Dr. Hale was already at the nurses' station, which meant the first thing that happened when she arrived was that. Brooks. He said her name the way people say the name of a recurring problem. Hale was 46, chief of emergency surgery, and operated with the assumption that competence was distributed in direct proportion to credentials, which meant that Emily, who had a nursing degree and 2 decades of field experience she'd never fully listed on any form, existed at the bottom of his hierarchy of useful people. He didn't dislike her exactly. He just didn't see her. I know, she said, dropping her bag. 3 minutes. I'll stay 3 minutes over. It's not about 3 minutes. He was looking at a chart but talking to her, which was his preferred configuration. It's about pattern. I don't have a pattern of being late. You have a pattern of operating outside your lane. He put the chart down. The patient in Bay 4, the construction worker. You ordered a pain protocol without waiting for my sign-off. You were in surgery. The man had a compartment syndrome developing, and the window for... That's not your call. It was the right call. He looked at her then, full on. You're a nurse, Brooks, an ER nurse. You're good at it, but good at what you are is not the same as qualified to be something else. Do you understand that? Emily held his gaze for exactly as long as it took to decide that this particular battle was not the one. Yes, she said, I understand. She turned to the patient board and he turned back to his charts. And that was the conversation. It was not the first version of that conversation. She suspected it wouldn't be the last. The shift was full the way Tuesday shifts in an urban ER are full. A dislocated shoulder from a cycling accident, a pediatric asthma case that scared everyone until the nebulizer did its job, a woman in her 70s who'd been dizzy for a week and whose blood pressure, when Emily first read it, made Emily pull the physician in within 30 seconds. That last one, Hale noted. He didn't say anything, just looked at the numbers, looked at the woman, and got to work. Emily moved on. Between patients, in the 15-minute break that was technically 30 minutes but was never 30 minutes, she sat in the break room with the stack of documents Olivia had pressed into her hands before the diner, and she started reading. The transfer paperwork was 4 pages. Standard county form, clearly typed, signature at the bottom with a notary stamp. Emily was not a lawyer, but she had spent enough years reading medical documentation, military forms, injury reports, and the kind of paperwork that accumulates around people who die too soon to know what careful attention to detail looked like, and what its absence looked like. She flipped to the 3rd page. The signature line. Ruth M. Carter. She pulled out the single document Olivia had included from the hospice file, a signature authorization form that Ruth Carter had signed 6 months before the transfer date, at a time when she had still been ambulatory and coherent. Same name, different signature. Emily looked at them side by side for a long time. She took photos with her phone, both of them. Then she went back to her patients, and she thought about it all shift. And when the shift ended, she walked to her car in the parking structure and did not walk through the section where she'd found Olivia and Ranger that morning, because something at the back of her neck told her to vary the route, and she had long ago learned to listen to that particular instinct. Olivia was already at the apartment when Emily got home, because Emily had left a spare key at the diner with Deb, who apparently collected this kind of favor without question. Ranger was asleep in the corner of the living room on a folded blanket, and Olivia had made tea, which Emily had not expected, and looked slightly less hollowed than she had that morning. They spread everything on the kitchen table. Emily had her laptop open and was cross-referencing while Olivia walked her through the timeline. The transfer document, the notary stamp, a name, R. Vallejo, and a registration number. Emily typed it into the state notary registry. The number came back as active, assigned to a woman in Carver County, which was 112 miles from Ashford Bay. This notary isn't local, Emily said. Is that wrong? Not necessarily wrong, but the stamp location should match the signing location, And if your mother was in hospice here, Emily pulled up a second tab. Crestline Property Holdings. Website that said nothing and had been registered 18 months ago. She searched the principal officers. The name that came up as registered agent was Trent Calloway. She'd seen that name. She stopped. She went back through the documents on the table until she found it. A letter from Olivia's second attorney, the one who'd withdrawn from the case. At the bottom, the law firm, Calloway, Branch and Associates. Olivia. Emily turned the laptop. Is this the attorney who dropped you? Olivia leaned forward, then sat back like the chair had shifted. That's the firm, the second firm. Her voice had gone thin. How is that? The attorney who dropped your case works for the same person who owns the company stealing your house. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that has weight. Ranger lifted his head from across the room and looked at them both, and then put his head back down, but his ears stayed up. I need to make some calls tomorrow, Emily said. And I need you to not tell anyone where you are. She paused. Anyone you've talked to about this? Has anyone asked where you were staying? The last attorney. He asked. Emily nodded slowly. She closed the laptop. Okay. She looked at Olivia. Go sleep. We'll go through the rest in the morning. She did not tell Olivia what she was thinking. What she was thinking was this. Forged signatures, a compromised attorney, a notary stamp from a county 100 miles away, and a company that had been incorporated only 18 months ago. 18 months ago, which was right around the time Ruth Carter's diagnosis had moved from treatable to terminal. Someone had started preparing to steal this property before Ruth Carter was even dead. That required planning. Planning required confidence. Confidence that kind usually came from knowing no one would get far enough to look. Emily turned off the kitchen light and went to the window and stood where she could see the street without being outlined against the glass. Old habit. The street was quiet. A car passed. She tracked its speed and direction without thinking about it. She went to bed at midnight. She did not sleep well, which was also an old habit, and around 2 a.m. she heard something she was not meant to hear. The particular sound of a window that had been unlocked from outside, which is slightly different from the sound of a window being opened from inside, and which she knew because she had been trained to know it. She was out of bed before the sound finished. She moved through this dark apartment without turning on any lights. Ranger was already up. She could hear him. Not a bark, just his claws on the hardwood and the low, barely there sound he'd made at the two men in the parking structure. That sound. Two of them. Coming through the window in the study. Emily's study, where the documents were still on the table. She let them get both feet inside. She needed them inside. The first one had a phone flashlight, which meant he couldn't see outside its beam. Emily came in from the side, put his wrist into a lock that had been second nature since she was 22, and redirected him into the wall with enough force to knock the phone loose. The second one had enough time to register that something had gone badly wrong before Ranger, 11 years old, gray muzzle, back haunches stiff, cleared the distance and put himself at the man's shoulder with the controlled, specific aggression of an animal that had been trained for exactly this. It was over in about 30 seconds. Emily had both of them zip-tied to the heavy radiator pipe in the hallway with the emergency restraint kit she kept in the hall closet. She'd had it for 6 years, and her previous landlord had asked about it once, and she'd said it was for medical purposes, which was true enough. By the time Olivia appeared in the hallway in the guest room doorway, with her eyes wide and her hands up. Are those? Yes, Emily said. Did you just? Yes. Ranger sat between Emily and the two men, still in the mode, still running hot, and Emily put her hand on his back. Good, she said quietly. He leaned into it slightly, just slightly. Good boy. She called the police. She gave them the information they needed, and not a word more. While they waited, she went to the study and looked at the table. The documents were still there. The men had made it to the doorway. She could see where the flashlight had swept, the arc of disturbed dust on the floor, but they hadn't reached the table. She straightened the stack of papers, ran her thumb along the edge. Somewhere in here was what someone would kill to keep buried. She hadn't found all of it yet, but she would. The police arrived, the two men were taken, statements were given. The officer in charge, A sergeant named Trevino, with tired eyes and professional courtesy, looked at the zip ties and the radiator pipe, and Emily and said, "You have medical training?" "Some," Emily said. He wrote something in his notebook. He looked at her once more before he left. She did not elaborate. She never elaborated. When the apartment was empty again, she sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out and her coffee going cold and Ranger at her feet, and she thought about the notary from Carver County and the attorney who'd been working both sides, and the 18 months of planning that had gone into taking a dying woman's house from her daughter. And she thought about the things she hadn't shown Olivia yet. The things she'd found at the bottom of the stack in the break room at Mercy General, tucked inside an envelope that Olivia had clearly never opened. The logo on it was a federal agency logo, military logistics, and the property address printed on the inside was the Lakeside House, and the date was 4 years ago. And what it described was an active classification notice on an easement corridor that ran through the back acreage of the Whitmore Lake property. That house wasn't just valuable because it was lakefront. That house sat on something someone in a federal program needed to control. Emily looked at the document for a long time in the quiet kitchen, the city outside going about its unaware business, Ranger breathing slow at her feet. Whatever Crestline Property Holdings was, it wasn't just a real estate company. And whoever had sent those 2 men through her window tonight would send more, once they figured out these 2 weren't coming back with what they'd been sent for. She pulled the document closer, read the classification header again. Her past had a long reach. She knew that better than anyone. She'd spent 5 years trying to put distance between herself and it, trading tactical boots for nursing shoes, a call sign for a name badge, a team for a hospital floor where no one asked the right questions. She hadn't expected the past to find her in a parking garage over a $10 sign and an old German shepherd. But here it was. And the only thing she knew for certain, sitting at that table at 3 a.m. with forged documents and federal classification notices and whatever came next waiting on the other side of dawn, was that she was not going to walk away from it. Ranger shifted at her feet, rested his chin on her boot, and exhaled slowly. "I know," she said quietly. "Me neither." She turned the classified document over and started making notes on the back of an envelope, and the lamp cast a small, steady circle of light across the table. And somewhere outside a car turned onto her street and slowed, and Emily did not look up from what she was writing. But she heard it, and she counted the seconds, and when it passed without stopping, she kept writing. She had a lot to do before morning. By 5 a.m, she had 3 pages of notes, 2 cold cups of coffee, and a clearer picture of what she was dealing with, which was not, as it turned out, a cleaner picture. The federal easement document was the hinge. Emily had read enough military logistics paperwork in her previous life to recognize the format, the specific font, the file number structure, the way the classification level was printed not as a header but as a footer, which was a post-2010 formatting change that most civilians wouldn't catch. This wasn't a standard property easement. The corridor described in the document ran along the northeastern edge of the Whitmore Lake property, through the tree line, and terminated at a coordinate that Emily plotted on a topographic map she pulled up on her laptop. The coordinate sat at the edge of a ridge that overlooked the lake on one side, and on the other, a long flat valley that 3 years ago had been announced as the future site of a federal infrastructure project, a logistics hub, rail-connected, partially defense contracted. She sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Crestline Property Holdings wasn't stealing lakefront real estate. They were acquiring a corridor that whoever was building that hub needed controlled. The lake house sat on the last private parcel between the project boundary and the ridge. Ruth Carter had died without knowing her property was sitting at the center of something much larger than a real estate dispute, and Olivia had inherited not just a house, but whatever leverage the location represented. Leverage she'd had no idea she was holding. The 2 men zip-tied to her radiator tonight hadn't been common burglars. They'd been sent specifically for the documents, which meant someone knew Olivia had them, which meant someone had been watching Olivia long before Emily got involved. She checked her window again. The street was still. She wrote down 2 more names from the documents, a secondary signatory on the transfer that she hadn't noticed before, and a company listed as co-petitioner on the county filing. Then she closed the laptop, stacked the papers, and slid them into the fireproof document bag she used for her own records. She put the bag in the back of the hall closet behind her winter coats and a box of medical textbooks and a rolled-up yoga mat she had owned for 4 years and used approximately once. Then she tried to sleep for 90 minutes. She got maybe 45. She was back at Mercy General by 7:15. The overnight staff was filing out, and the day shift was coming in with coffee cups and the specific tired, wired energy of people who had not quite left yesterday behind. Emily changed into scrubs in the locker room, and when she came out, Dr. Hale was already at the board, already moving with the aggressive efficiency that she had learned to read as his default. Not angry, just relentlessly operational, which to other people looked the same. He glanced at her. "You look terrible." "I had a break-in last night." He paused. Actually paused, which was unusual. Was anyone hurt?" "No." She pulled up the first patient file. "I'm fine." He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, and she could see him deciding whether to push it and then deciding not to, which was approximately as much human consideration as he ever extended. "There's a patient in Bay 2, 63-year-old male, blunt abdominal trauma, hemodynamically unstable when EMS brought him in. Overnight team stabilized, but I want fresh eyes on the imaging." "I'll take it." She didn't tell him that her eyes felt like sandpaper. She went to Bay 2. The patient's name was Harold, and he was the kind of man who apologized for being in a hospital bed, which Emily found both irritating and deeply human. She reviewed his imaging with the attending on the floor, flagged an area of the scan she thought warranted a second look, and was right about it. A developing bleed, slow but not trivial, that the overnight team had categorized as stable, but which Emily's gut said was not going to stay that way. She made her case to the attending doctor, Lena Park, who was newer than Hale and had the quality Emily appreciated in people she worked with. She actually listened. "Okay," Lena said, looking at the scan. "Let's get him into observation." They moved Harold. He thanked Emily 3 times, which she deflected each time in the way she'd learned to deflect gratitude. Acknowledge it without letting it slow you down. She had other patients. She moved. The morning went that way. Patient to patient, floor to floor. Around 10, she had a 6-minute break and used it to call a number she hadn't called in 2 years. It rang 4 times. Then, Sato. "It's Brooks." She was standing in the stairwell, door closed. "I have something I need a set of eyes on." A brief silence. "What kind of something?" "Federal easement document, military logistics designation. I need to know if it's still active and who's listed as the contracting authority." Another silence, longer. "Where'd you get it?" "Long story. Can you run it or not?" "Send me the file number." He paused. "Emily, are you in something?" "I'm trying to figure that out," she said. "I'll send it tonight." She hung up. She went back to the floor. Hale was coming out of Bay 4 and gave her the look he reserved for when she'd been somewhere he hadn't approved of. She didn't explain. She picked up the next chart. Around noon, the day cracked open. A woman came to the nurse's station. Not a patient, not a visitor. Mid-40s, blazer, the particular posture of someone who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around her arrival. She asked for Emily by name, which was the first unusual thing, and then produced a business card and slid it across the counter, which was the second. The card said Crestline Property Holdings, Community Relations. Emily looked at the card. She looked at the woman. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Diana Voss," the woman said. Her voice was smooth in the way that smooth voices are when someone has practiced them. "We understand you've been in contact with a woman named Olivia Carter." "I work in an emergency room," Emily said. "I'm in contact with a lot of people." Diana Voss smiled, which didn't reach anything above her jaw. "Ms. Carter has unfortunately become confused about some legal matters involving her family's property. We're concerned for her well-being. If you could let us know where she's staying—" "I couldn't," Emily said. The smile held. "Ms. Brooks, this is really a legal matter. We have legitimate court filings and—" "I'm sure you do," Emily said. She slid the card back across the counter. "If you have a legal matter, you file it in court. If you're here about a patient, I'll need you to go through the front desk. If you're here as a visitor, visiting hours are noon to 8. She held the woman's gaze. "Is there anything else?" Diana Voss took the card. The smile went somewhere else, which was closer to the truth of things. We just want this resolved peacefully, she said. I'm sure, Emily said, and turned back to her screen. She heard the woman leave. She did not watch her go, but she registered the direction of the footsteps and the sound of the elevator, and she held the information the way she held all information, without reacting to it in real time, just filing it, and she thought, they know where I work, they know my name, they came here, not to threaten, to measure, to see what she'd do. She typed Harold's updated chart notes, and thought about the two names she'd written down at 5 in the morning, and the easement corridor in Sato, who was going to call her back with something she probably was not going to like. She texted Olivia from the stairwell at 2. Don't open the door for anyone. Don't tell anyone where you are. I'll be back by 7. The reply came back in 4 minutes. Is everything okay? She typed, working on it, which was true. The rest of the afternoon was the kind of relentless that made you forget to eat, which she did, and around 4 o'clock Lena Park found her in the supply room and said, Harold's holding. You called it. With the directness of someone giving credit without flourish, which Emily appreciated. Hale passed her in the corridor around 5 and said nothing, which she also appreciated. At 5:40, Sato called back. She took it in the stairwell again. Tell me. The file number you sent me. He stopped, started again. M. That document has a still active classification on it. Contracting authority is listed under the Logistics Modernization Program out of Fort Delacroix. The corridor it references is flagged as a secured acquisition target. Secured acquisition. As in, it's supposed to already be in federal hands. As in, whoever is supposed to have acquired that corridor for the program has been reporting it as completed for, she heard him checking something. 14 months. But the property wasn't transferred to any federal entity. No, Sato said. It was transferred to a private holding company. Emily leaned against the stairwell wall. She could hear the building around her, the ventilation, a distant elevator, the specific hum of a hospital going about its business of keeping people alive. Someone filed false completion reports to a federal program and diverted the acquisition to a private company. And whoever did that, Sato said carefully, has been using the program as cover for what looks like private land banking. If that property gets developed and that corridor gets sold to the infrastructure project, they collect federal contract money and private sale money on the same piece of land. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. This is not a real estate dispute, Brooks. I know. You need to... Oh, I know, Sato. She pushed off the wall. Don't repeat this conversation. Already forgot it, he said. Be careful. She ended the call and stood there for a second with her hand on the phone and the stairwell around her and the weight of what she'd just confirmed settling into place. This wasn't corruption at a local level. Someone with access to federal logistics programs and enough cover to file false acquisition reports for over a year had built this. That required reach. That required protection from somewhere inside the system. She thought about Diana Voss in her blazer and her smooth voice and the business card she'd produced in the middle of an emergency room like she owned the building. She thought about two men coming through a window at 2 in the morning for a stack of documents. She thought about the classified file number in Sato's voice when he'd said be careful, not like someone giving a polite exit from a conversation, but the way people who've been in operational situations say it, which means, I'm not sure I can help you if this goes sideways. She went back to the floor and worked until 7, and then she went home. Oh, Olivia had not opened the door for anyone. Ranger greeted Emily with the low-key dignity he applied to everything. A single look, a shift of position, a tail that moved once in acknowledgement. Olivia was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold and the expression of a person who had been sitting very still in order to stay composed. You have to tell me what's happening, Olivia said. Emily sat across from her and told her. Not everything. Not Sato, not the classification level, not the specific word federal, but enough. The easement corridor, the infrastructure project, the false acquisition reports, the fact that Crestline was likely a front for something larger, and that the people running it had enough reach to get attorneys to drop cases and county offices, to validate forged documents, and send representatives to Emily's workplace in the middle of the afternoon. Olivia listened without interrupting, which was harder than it looked, and when Emily finished, she sat for a long moment with her hands around the cold cup. They killed my mother's property while she was still alive, she said. Not a question, just a thing she was saying out loud for the first time. I don't know the full chain yet, Emily said carefully. But they planned it before she died. Yes. Olivia nodded, once. Slow. The expression on her face was not shock. Shock had been 14 months ago. This was something different. The particular look of a person whose suspicion, which they'd been told was paranoia, which they'd been told was grief-talking, which they'd been told to let go of, turned out to be correct. It looked like grief and vindication arriving at the same moment, which is one of the worst feelings available. What do we do? Olivia asked. I'm working on that. Emily paused. There's one more thing I need to look at. In the documents. She went to the hall closet and came back with the fireproof bag and spread the contents on the table. She found what she was looking for near the bottom, a transfer receipt, the kind issued when a deed is recorded, stamped with a county filing number. She pulled up the county register's online portal on her laptop and typed the number in. The record loaded. Emily stared at it. The transfer receipt in Olivia's stack showed one filing number. The county's online database, updated in real time, showed the same number, but attached to a different document. Not the deed transfer. A building permit application, filed 3 days ago, for demolition. Olivia. Emily turned the laptop. They're not planning to hold this property. Olivia looked at the screen. They're going to tear it down. The permit's been filed. If someone with enough standing doesn't contest it within... Emily checked the filing date. 72 hours. The permit processes automatically. Olivia's face went through something Emily didn't try to name. The house on the lake was not just a house. Emily knew that. 11 years of Ranger's life had been in those rooms. Olivia's mother had died in one of those rooms. 31 years of a family's particular accumulation of existing in a place was in those walls, and someone had filed a demolition permit on it 3 days ago. How do we stop it? Olivia asked. Her voice was steady, which was impressive. We need to file an injunction in county court before the permit processes. That requires a licensed attorney. Emily held up a hand before Olivia could speak. I know, the first two dropped the case. I'm not calling a local attorney. She pulled her laptop back. I'm calling someone I used to work with. She's based in Harwick. She doesn't have any ties to Ashford Bay, and she owes me a favor from about 4 years ago. What kind of favor? Emily looked at her. The kind you don't ask about. She picked up her phone and found the contact. 7 years old, last verified 2 years ago, which meant it might not work. She called anyway. 3 rings. Then a voice Emily hadn't heard in a long time, low, precise, slightly surprised. Brooks. Mara. I need a real estate fraud injunction filed in Ashford Bay County Court by tomorrow morning, and I need it to survive contact with people who have already gotten 2 attorneys to walk away from this case. A pause. That's a lot. I know what I'm asking. Another pause. Longer. Ranger got up from his corner, walked to the middle of the kitchen, turned in a tight circle, and sat again facing the door. Emily watched him do it. He'd done the same thing 6 minutes before the men came through the window. Mara? Emily said. I need an answer. Send me everything you have, Mara said. Tonight. I'll look at it. You'll do more than look. The briefest exhale. Yeah, I will. A pause. Brooks, what have you gotten into? Emily watched Ranger watching the door. His ears were up. His breathing had changed. Mara, she said, I'm going to have to call you back. She was already on her feet. Ranger had not moved, but something had changed in the apartment's specific silence. Not a sound, but the way sound sits when something outside is trying not to make any. Emily crossed to the window without turning on the light, stood to the side of the frame, and looked down at the street. 3 vehicles, not parked like people park when they live here or are visiting, parked like people park when they're staging. One at each end of the block, one directly across from the building's entrance. Dark, running. She turned from the window. Olivia was watching her from the kitchen doorway. Emily crossed to the hall closet, reached past the winter coats and the yoga mat and the box of textbooks, and closed her hand around the fireproof bag. Then she looked at Olivia. Get Ranger. Don't take anything else. We have to go right now. What? There's a service exit through the basement laundry, Emily said. She was already moving. Stay close to me and stay behind Ranger and don't run until I say run. Olivia had the sense not to ask further questions. She moved. Ranger moved with her. No hesitation, back into service, whatever his joints cost him, invisible in the execution. Emily was at the apartment door, hand on the knob, listening. The hallway was quiet, which was exactly the wrong thing for a building that should, at 7:45 on a weeknight, have the usual sounds. A television, a door, someone's keys. The quiet was constructed. Emily had heard constructed quiet before, in places where the architecture was more lethal than a parking garage, and the people creating the silence were considerably more professional than tonight's visitors. She opened the door. The hallway was empty. She moved them out and toward the stairwell. Not the elevator, never the elevator. And the three of them went down in the dark and the particular silence of people trying to make no sound at all. And Emily held the door at each landing and listened, and they made it to the basement and through the laundry room and to the service exit. She pushed it open 2 inches and held it there. The alley was clear. They went. And they were halfway down the alley when the front of the building lit up. Not fire, not explosion, but the sudden specific light of vehicle headlights and what sounded like a door, and then a voice, amplified, carrying across the night with the particular authority of people who were not asking, Emily Brooks. "We know you have federal property documents. Come out and this ends now." Emily grabbed Olivia's arm and they ran. They ran until the alley ended, and then Emily made the call without stopping. Left, not right, because right was back toward the street where the vehicles were staged, and left was deeper into the service corridor between buildings, the kind of space that exists in every city block and that nobody thinks about until they need it. Olivia kept up. Ranger kept up. And the fact that he did it on 11-year-old joints with a stiff back haunch was something Emily filed away to think about later, when there was a later to think in. The amplified voice behind them had stopped. That was worse than if it had continued. It meant they'd shifted to a different approach. Emily counted the seconds between the voice stopping and when she'd expect them to reach the alley entrance. 6, maybe 8, depending on how many they had and how they'd staged. She had the fireproof bag in her left hand and Olivia's sleeve in her right, and she was running a parallel map of this block in her head, which she could do because she had walked this neighborhood every day for 3 years and had the habit, which she'd never explained to anyone, of noting exits. There was a loading dock at the end of this corridor for a restaurant supply company. The dock would be unmanned at this hour. The door would be secured but not alarmed. Supply companies use padlocks, not electronic systems, because electronic systems failed in loading environments. She'd noticed that. She'd noticed it the way she noticed all the small practical details of the world she moved through, which was not paranoia, just a thing that happened once you'd spent enough time in places where the difference between a padlocked door and a dead end was the difference between getting out and not. She got the door open in 11 seconds with the multi-tool on her keychain and pushed them through. Inside was dark and smelled like cardboard and industrial cleaner. Shelving units, stacked boxes, the skeletal shapes of commercial kitchen equipment waiting for delivery. Emily pulled the door shut behind them and stood in the dark and listened. Footsteps in the alley outside. 2 sets moving fast, then slowing. She heard them go past the door. Then stop. Ranger was silent. Olivia was breathing through her nose, controlled, which Emily appreciated without having time to say so. The footsteps moved on. Emily gave it 90 seconds. She counted in her head, not looking at her phone because screens make light, and light makes you findable. And when she reached 90, she moved them deeper into the storage space, toward the far wall where a secondary door opened onto a different street. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it under her jacket. "Mara, what happened to calling me back?" Emily typed with one thumb. "Compromised. Call you from different number in 20. She pocketed the phone and turned to Olivia. In the dark, she could make out the shape of her coat, bag, the white of her face turned toward Emily. Ranger sat between them, angled back toward the first door. "Are you hurt?" Emily asked, quiet. "No." Olivia's voice was controlled but thin. "Who are those people?" "Contractors, private. The kind that get hired when people with money need things done that they can't file paperwork for." Emily paused. "They're not law enforcement. That amplified voice was theater. If they were law enforcement, they'd have had the building surrounded and they wouldn't have announced themselves. So they can't actually, They can do plenty, Emily said. Just not legally, which is the problem. She looked at the far door. We're going to go out the other side of this building. There's a 24-hour laundromat 2 blocks east. I need to make a call and I need somewhere with other people in it. Okay. Olivia. She waited until the woman looked directly at her. I know this is a lot. You're doing well. Olivia made a sound that was not quite a laugh. I'm terrified. That's fine, Emily said. Terrified and moving is better than calm and standing still. She shifted the bag to her right hand and pushed the far door open. The laundromat was called Spin City, which was the kind of name that existed without irony, and at 8:15 on a weeknight it held 4 people. A college-aged man asleep against a dryer, a woman folding an enormous pile of children's clothing with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, and 2 older men sitting near the front window, sharing a bag of chips and a conversation in a language Emily didn't speak. Nobody looked at them twice. Ranger lay down under a plastic chair and put his chin on his paws and was immediately invisible to anyone not specifically looking for a dog. Emily borrowed a phone from the folding woman, asked directly, explained she'd dropped hers, and the woman handed it over with the mild wariness and fundamental decency of someone deciding to trust a stranger in a laundromat. Emily stepped toward the back of the room and called Mara from the unfamiliar number. Mara picked up on the first ring. Who is this? It's me. Different phone. I don't have much time. Emily kept her voice low. I need you to hear something and then tell me if what I think is happening is what's happening. She laid it out in under 3 minutes. The easement document, the false acquisition reports, the infrastructure project, the Crestline connection, the attorney who'd been working both sides, the demolition permit filed 3 days ago, the people outside her building tonight. Mara listened without speaking, which was her way, and when Emily finished there was a silence that had texture to it. Emily, Mara said, that classification level you described, that's not local fraud. That's federal contract fraud with a military logistics component. That's not a real estate case. That's a federal case. I know. You need to contact. I can't go to local federal offices. I don't know how far the reach on this goes, and I can't risk walking into a field office that might have someone in it who's already been managed. She pressed her back against the dryer behind her. I need to file the injunction to stop the demolition permit. I need that tonight. Can you do it remotely? I need original documents. I'll get them to you. How? Emily thought. Overnight courier. There's a 24-hour shipping outlet on Merritt. If I get them there by 11, they're in Harwick by 7. And the injunction? You file it in Ashford Bay County Court as soon as they open, 8 a.m. Brooks. Mara's voice had the quality of someone measuring the weight of a thing before picking it up. If I file this and the wrong people see it before the judge does, I know the risk. Do you know the risk for me? Emily was quiet for a moment. That was fair. Yes, she said. I do. And I'm asking anyway. Another silence, longer. Okay, Mara said. Get me the documents. Emily handed the phone back to the folding woman and said, Thank you, and the woman nodded and went back to her pile, and Emily stood for a moment in the smell of warm laundry and fabric softener and thought about what came next. The fireproof bag. The shipping outlet on Merritt. She needed to photograph everything first. The originals went to Mara, but the copies stayed with Emily, because you never put all of it in one place. That was not a legal principle. That was something older. She looked at Olivia, who was sitting with Ranger, one hand resting on his back. Not petting him, just resting there. Ranger hadn't moved. We need to send the documents to someone who can use them, Emily said. Then we need somewhere to be until morning. I know somewhere, Olivia said. There's a woman, Ruth's nurse from the hospice, Delphine. She lives out past Graywood. She's not connected to any of this. She offered when I first... She stopped. She offered at the beginning. I said no. I thought I was handling it. Call her, Emily said. Delphine Arsenault was 62 years old, lived alone on a 5-acre property that used to be her parents' horse farm. And when Olivia called and explained in unspecific terms that she needed somewhere to stay for the night, said, Honey, I've got a guest room and a pot of rice on the stove. Come whenever you get here, with the immediate practicality of someone who didn't need the whole story to decide. Emily drove. She'd retrieved her car from the block behind her building via a route that added 12 minutes and zero risk, checking twice before she got in, moving with the specific patience of someone for whom paranoia had never been the right word. The right word was attention, sustained and unglamorous. The fireproof bag was in the trunk. She'd photographed every document at the shipping outlet on Merritt before sealing the courier envelope, and she'd handed it across the counter at 10:47 and watched it disappear into the system. They reached Delphine's property at 11:30. The house was old and warm and smelled like cooking and cut grass, and Delphine took one look at Olivia and hugged her without asking questions, and one look at Ranger and said, "He's welcome inside," and one look at Emily and said, "You look like you haven't eaten since this morning." She was correct. Emily had not eaten since a granola bar at 6 a.m. She ate rice and something with chicken in it standing at the kitchen counter while Delphine settled Olivia in the guest room, and Ranger arranged himself on a rug near the door, like a piece of furniture that had always been there. Emily's hands were completely steady, which they always were when she was operational. The shaking, when it came later, in the quiet. She was used to managing that particular schedule. At midnight, she called Sato again from her own phone. "The documents are in transit to an attorney in Harwick," she said when he answered. "She's filing an injunction at 8 a.m. I need you to think about who you know at the contracting authority level for Fort Delacroix's logistics program." A pause. "Emily, I know. You're asking me to surface a federal fraud case from the outside. I'm asking you to think about who you know," she said. "I'm not asking you to do anything yet." Another pause. She heard him exhale. "There's a CID investigative unit at Delacroix. I know the unit chief tangentially. She's not someone who would have been in a position to be compromised by this. She came in from outside the program 18 months ago." 18 months ago. "Yeah," Sato said. "I know what you're thinking. Can you reach her?" "It's midnight, Brooks. Can you reach her?" "Probably," he said. "Give me until morning." She lay on the couch in Delphine's living room with her jacket on and her phone on her chest, and she did not sleep, but she let her body rest, which was a different thing, and she ran through the chain of events the way she used to run pre-mission walkthroughs. Sequence, contingency, fallback, until she had it mapped enough to let go of it. At 4 in the morning, Ranger got up, walked over to where she was lying, looked at her for a moment, and then lay down on the floor directly beside the couch. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. She put one hand down. He didn't move into it. He just let it rest against his side. "Good boy," she said quietly. She meant it as something larger than the words. Morning came gray and smelling like rain that hadn't arrived yet. Emily was up at 5:30, had Delphine's coffee by 6, and was standing on the porch watching the empty road when Sato called at 6:42. "Major Irene Vasquez," he said. "CID, Fort Delacroix. She's interested." Emily straightened. "You told her?" "I told her I had a former colleague with material evidence of federal contract fraud in the military logistics program she oversees. I told her the material included a still active classified easement document and documentation of false acquisition reporting going back 14 months. He paused. She said she'd been looking at a gap in the program reporting, an anomaly she couldn't source. "This is her source." "I think so." Another pause. "She wants to move fast, wants to meet." "Where?" "She said she'd come to you, wherever you are." His voice shifted slightly. She asked me how you knew what you knew about the document format, the reporting structure. I didn't answer her." "Good. She's going to ask you herself." Emily looked at the road. A crow landed on the fence post at the edge of Delphine's property, looked at her with the flat appraisal of crows, and flew away. "That's fine," she said. "Tell her where we are." At 7:53, Mara called. "Injunctions filed, Judge Okafor, first on the docket." She sounded like she'd been awake since 5, which she probably had. Emily, the clerk recognized the Crestline name, said there was already a related filing she wasn't supposed to discuss. She discussed it anyway because she's apparently been watching this case get shuffled for 6 months and she's tired of it. What was the related filing? An emergency sale authorization, fast-tracked through a magistrate's office 3 days ago. Emily, if your injunction hadn't gone in this morning, the property would have transferred before anyone could contest it. By Thursday, under a sale value of $65,000 on a property assessed at $900. Mara's voice had the particular flatness of someone who was angry but too professional to let it run. Whoever built this expected it to be finished before anyone noticed. They almost were. Almost. A brief silence. The injunction holds the demolition permit and freezes the transfer. But it's going to be contested within hours, Emily. They'll come at it fast. We need the federal angle moving before local attorneys get in front of a sympathetic judge and get it lifted. It's moving, Emily said. By this afternoon. She hung up. Olivia was standing in the doorway behind her. What's happening? Olivia asked. She had Delphine's coffee in both hands and the look of someone who had slept badly and woken up understanding it was a productive bad sleep, that the night had done some work on her, organized something. The demolition's frozen, Emily said. For now. Olivia breathed out. And the house? The house is still there. Emily paused. Olivia, before today is over, there are going to be people here. Federal investigators, military. They're going to ask you questions about your mother's estate, the timing of the hospice care, any conversation she had in the last year about the property. Olivia's chin came up slightly. I can answer questions. I know you can. Emily held her gaze. All of it is going to come out. Everything they did to your mother and to you. But it comes out in daylight, in front of the right people, with documentation behind every piece of it. That's what we built last night. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Why are you doing this? She asked. Not ungrateful, genuinely asking. Emily considered the honest answer and gave her most of it. Because someone used the machinery of the law to steal from a woman who couldn't fight back, and everyone she asked for help walked away, and I can't do that. She paused. And because Ranger didn't leave you. Olivia looked down at Ranger, who had appeared silently in the doorway behind her and was leaning with visible heaviness against the doorframe, resting without resting. He never has, she said softly. Major Vasquez arrived at 11:14 in a dark government vehicle with a second vehicle behind it, CID. The decal removed, but the antenna configuration unmistakable to anyone who'd ever been adjacent to that kind of operational transport. She was shorter than Emily had expected from Sato's description, compact, with close-cropped natural hair and the specific economy of movement that came from long service. She shook Emily's hand in the driveway and looked at her with assessment that wasn't rude. Sato said you'd have documentation, she said. Copies, Emily said. Originals are with an attorney in Harwick who filed an injunction in county court this morning. I can have her transmit the file to your unit by noon if you want to establish federal jurisdiction. Vasquez looked at her for a moment. Sato also said you used to be in the system. I'm a nurse, Emily said. He said that too. Vasquez's expression didn't change much, but something in it acknowledged what they both understood. That the specific way Emily had assessed the document format, the reporting structure, the operational staging of the people outside her building last night, did not come from a nursing career. All right, she said. Show me what you have. They spread the copies on Delphine's kitchen table. Vasquez went through them without speaking, which was how people read documents when they were actually reading them. Her investigator, a younger man named Pell, who introduced himself as Specialist Pell and then did not speak again, photographed each page. Vasquez stopped on the easement document, read it twice, and looked up. This file number, she said. This is from the primary acquisition ledger for the modernization program. She was not asking. Yes. It was marked completed 14 months ago. Something moved behind Vasquez's eyes. I flagged that acquisition in my first audit. The completion certificate was filed before the standard confirmation process finished. I was told the previous unit chief had expedited it because of a timeline pressure from the infrastructure contractor. She set the document down flat. There was no timeline pressure. I checked. The infrastructure project doesn't break ground for another 8 months. So the expedited completion was fabricated. To get the ledger to show the corridor is secured, Vasquez said, while the actual property got transferred to a private company instead of federal custody. She looked at Emily. Someone in this program filed false acquisition completion records to divert federal acquisition funds to a private real estate operation. That's criminal fraud against the United States government. She said it with the flat precision of someone stating a calibration reading. This is my case. It's your case? Emily agreed. The private company. Crestline. Registered 18 months ago. The registered agent runs an affiliated law firm that has systematically discouraged legal challenge to the property transfer. Emily paused. Last night, private contractors staged at my apartment building and announced themselves through amplification. No badges, no federal identification, theatrical. They wanted the documents and were willing to do it loudly to see if I'd fold. Vasquez absorbed this. They know we're coming now. They know something is moving. They don't know what shape it's in yet. Emily looked at the table. There's a woman in the guest room who is the rightful owner of the Whitmore Lake property. Her mother's signature was forged on a deed transfer while her mother was on hospice care. I have the hospice medical records. I have the signature comparison, and I have a notary stamp that doesn't match the location of the alleged signing. I need all of that. You'll have it. Vasquez straightened. She looked at Pell, who closed his folder and stood. She looked back at Emily. Miss Brooks, a pause that carried something she was deciding whether to say. The people who built this didn't expect anyone to get deep enough into the documentation to find the federal angle. They relied on attrition, wear down the attorneys, bury the county filing, move fast enough that the transfer is a fait accompli before anyone understands what they're looking at. She held Emily's gaze. Most people wouldn't have known what they were looking at. Most people weren't looking, Emily said. Vasquez nodded once. I'm going to make some calls. By this afternoon, I expect to have federal jurisdiction formally established on this fraud case. When I do, I'll need Olivia Carter's formal statement, and I'll need yours. She picked up the easement document. And I'll need to know where the originals are. Harwick, Attorney Mara Ellison. I'll give you her direct number. They were moving toward the door when Vasquez stopped. She'd caught sight of Ranger, who had materialized in the hallway doorway in the quiet way he moved now, slow and deliberate, watching. K9? Vasquez asked. Retired, Emily said. Vasquez looked at the dog for a moment. Then at Emily. Seems like he's still on duty. Emily looked at Ranger. His ears were up, but not alarmed, just attending, just present. He is, she said. Mshkit. The afternoon unfolded in the way things unfold when something that has been held in compression for a long time finally releases, not clean, not smooth, but undeniably and irreversibly in motion. Vasquez made her calls from Delphine's driveway. Emily heard snatches through the window. Federal jurisdiction, fraud against the United States, material evidence in hand, and watched the tone of the conversation shift, watched Vasquez's already straight posture straighten further, watched Pell start typing on a tablet with the speed of someone receiving instructions faster than expected. By 2 o'clock, 2 more vehicles had arrived on Delphine's property road. CID. And alongside them, to Emily's slight surprise, a civilian federal vehicle that turned out to belong to an assistant U.S. attorney from the district office in Harwick, a young man named Greer, who had the eager precision of someone who had been waiting for a case with teeth and had just found one. Olivia gave her statement at the kitchen table. Emily sat beside her, not as counsel but as presence, and listened to Olivia describe in careful, tired, precise terms what had been done to her mother and to her, and watched the federal attorney write and the investigator record, and she felt something she didn't name, but that had to do with the particular satisfaction of watching the machinery of accountability begin to turn, slowly, grinding, but turning. Mara transmitted the originals electronically at 2:47. Greer confirmed receipt at 2:51. Vasquez had her phone to her ear almost continuously. At 3:30, Emily stepped outside for the first time in hours. She stood on the porch with her coffee gone cold in her hand and the rain that had been threatened all morning finally beginning, soft and steady, smelling like the end of something. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Brooks? A voice she didn't recognize. Male. measured in the way that voices are measured when the speaker is deciding how much leverage they have left. You have made a significant mistake. Emily looked at the rain. Who is this? You don't need my name, the voice said. You need to understand that what you've put in motion cannot be stopped, and that the people it exposes are not people who accept that quietly. Okay, Emily said. That's your response. That's my response, she said. Is there something else? A pause. You were easier to find than you think. Your history, your record, your previous associations. The word associations came with a weight that meant something specific. You've been very careful to keep those quiet. It would be a shame if that changed. Emily looked at the rain for a moment. She thought about the 5 years she'd spent building the distance between Emily Brooks, the ER nurse, and who she'd been before. The careful omissions on forms. The scrubs instead of the uniform. The hospital floor instead of whatever theater of operations the rotation would have taken her to next. She thought about Ranger lying down next to her couch at 4 a.m. Do what you need to do, she said, and ended the call. She went back inside. Vasquez was standing in the hallway with her phone down and an expression that Emily couldn't quite read. Not alarm, but something adjacent to urgency. I need to tell you something, Vasquez said. Okay. The Crestline principal, the name behind the registered agent, the actual ownership. We ran it through the federal contractor database. She paused. The name that came back is Aldrich Vance. Emily did not recognize the name. Who is that? He's currently a regional director at the Federal Infrastructure Logistics Office, Vasquez said. The office that oversees the modernization program this easement is attached to. Emily stared at her. He's the oversight authority for the program he's defrauding. He has been for 22 months, Vasquez said, which means every audit, every flag, every anomaly I found when I took over the unit, everything that should have triggered an investigation. She stopped. He was the one who signed off on closing the flags. Emily understood. 22 months. He had been in a position to suppress his own fraud from inside the oversight structure, which meant he had to have known 18 months ago when Crestline was incorporated, 14 months ago when the false completion records were filed, 3 months ago when Ruth Carter's forged signature appeared on a deed transfer, that as long as he held that position, no internal review would ever go far enough to reach him. Where is he now? Emily asked. Vasquez's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Something changed in her face. Not fast, just a shift, like a light adjusting. He was in Washington this morning. She looked up. But he got on a plane at 1:45. She showed Emily the screen. His phone just pinged a cell tower. She paused. In Ashford Bay. The rain outside picked up. Emily heard it on the roof of Delphine's old farmhouse, heavier now, steady and real, and she thought about the man on the phone. The people it exposes are not people who accept that quietly. And she thought about the amplified voice outside her building last night, and the staged vehicles, and Diana Voss in her blazer producing a business card in an emergency room. He hadn't sent people to manage this from a distance. He was here. He's coming to clean it up himself, Emily said. And from outside, past the rain and the wet road and the fence post where the crow had been, past the line of government vehicles and the gray afternoon, there was the sound of another vehicle turning onto Delphine's property road, and this one was moving fast. Vasquez moved first. She was already at the front door when the vehicle cleared the tree line at the end of Delphine's property road, and she had her hand up, the flat palm signal that meant hold position, before Emily had fully processed what she was looking at. Behind Vasquez, Pell shifted his weight, and his hand went to his hip in the particular way of someone who was not drawing but was no longer casual. The vehicle was a black SUV. It stopped 30 meters short of the house, engine running, and sat there. Emily stepped to the window, off to the side of it. The rain was coming down steadily now, and the windshield had just enough glare to make the occupants unclear. She counted, 2 people visible in the front, possibly more in the back. He wouldn't come in the front, Emily said. Vasquez glanced back at her. If he flew here himself, if he's moving this fast, he's rattled. Rattled people make the mistake of thinking they can still intimidate their way through. Emily looked at the SUV. But he's also not stupid. He knows we have the documents. He knows the injunction is filed. He knows the federal angle is exposed. She paused. He's not here to clean it up quietly. He's here because he needs something specific. What? Emily thought about the phone call, the warning dressed as a threat, the reference to her history, her previous associations. He thinks he has leverage on me, she said. He's here to use it. Vasquez looked at her steadily. Does he? Emily held her gaze for a moment. No, she said. But he doesn't know that yet. Greer, the assistant U.S. attorney, appeared from the kitchen doorway where he'd been on his phone for the last 20 minutes. He looked at the vehicle outside and then at Vasquez. That's Vance, and he's here in person while a federal fraud investigation is actively opening against him. That's witness tampering, Vasquez said. At minimum. I need to be recording this. You're already recording this, Vasquez said, and Greer looked slightly startled and then checked his tablet and realized she was correct. The interview setup they'd used for Olivia's statement was still running, picking up everything in the room. The SUV's engine cut off. The front doors opened. 2 men got out. The driver, Broad, and a second who came around from the passenger side and opened the rear door. And the man who stepped out was neither broad nor physical in any obvious way. He was 60 or near it, silver-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than a month of Emily's salary, and he walked up Delphine's porch steps with the specific, unhurried confidence of someone who had been the most powerful person in every room he'd entered for a long time. He knocked. 3 times, measured. Vasquez opened the door. He looked at Vasquez and then at her insignia, and something behind his eyes recalculated, but only briefly. Major, he said. I'm Aldrich Vance. I'm the regional director of the Federal Infrastructure Logistics Office, and I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding about some program documents that have ended up in unauthorized hands. I'd like to resolve this without it becoming, Mr. Vance, Vasquez said. You should know that this conversation is being recorded, that we have established federal jurisdiction on an active fraud investigation this afternoon, and that you have the right to have counsel present before you say anything further. He blinked. Not much. Just once. I don't need counsel. I'm here as the legitimate oversight authority for... You're here as a subject of investigation, Vasquez said. She stepped back from the door. Not an invitation. A clarification of space. He looked past her into the room. He found Emily, which was what he'd been looking for. His eyes went still in the way eyes go still when someone is deciding how to play something. Ms. Brooks, he said. Mr. Vance, Emily said. He stepped inside without being invited, which told her everything she needed to know about how he'd operated for 22 months, as someone for whom the existing rules of a space simply reoriented around him. His 2 men stayed on the porch. I called you earlier, he said to Emily. I want you to understand something. He glanced at Vasquez, then back. The documents you've gathered, they touch on classified program infrastructure. Handling them without authorization is a federal offense. The documents were provided to me by their rightful owner, Emily said. Olivia Carter, the legal heir to the Whitmore Lake property, who received them as part of her mother's estate. She paused. You know her name. You know the property. You've been managing this since before Ruth Carter died. Something moved across his face, quick. He controlled it. That's an extraordinary accusation. It's an accurate one. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't move from where she was standing. You incorporated Crestline Property Holdings 18 months ago. You used your position as oversight director to flag and then suppress the acquisition anomaly before your own investigators could source it. You filed false completion records on the easement corridor acquisition. You orchestrated the forgery of a dying woman's signature on a deed transfer. She held his gaze. And when that wasn't enough, you sent people to a woman's apartment building with amplifiers and dark vehicles to try to frighten her into handing back the documentation. The room was quiet enough that the rain on the roof was audible. Vance looked at her for a long moment. You have a very interesting background for an ER nurse, he said. His voice had changed. The resolution-seeking warmth was gone, and what was under it was colder and more honest. Do you know how easy it is to surface someone's service record, deployment history, the specific nature of their previous role? He let that sit. People make choices about what they disclose on their employment applications. Those choices have consequences. Emily understood what he was doing. He'd pulled her record. He'd found the gap between what she'd listed on her nursing employment forms and what her actual service history contained. He thought the gap was something she needed to protect. Major Vasquez, Emily said, without looking away from Vance, "Do you want to tell him, or should I?" Vasquez had the closest thing to a restrained smile that her face appeared capable of producing. "Mr. Vance, Ms. Brooks' service record was pulled by my office this morning as part of establishing the credibility of the material evidence she provided. It's a matter of federal record now." She paused. Her previous designation, her unit, her clearance level, all of it is in my case file. Another pause. "She's not hiding anything. You just didn't know what you were looking at." Vance's expression went through something it didn't quite recover from. The door to the hallway opened and Olivia came out of the guest room. She'd heard the voices. She stood in the hallway doorway with Ranger beside her and looked at the man in the expensive coat, and her face was not afraid. It was the face of a person who had spent 14 months being told she was wrong and confused and needed to let it go, looking at the specific human being who had built the machinery that said so. She didn't speak. She just stood there. And that was enough. Vance was on record by 4 o'clock. Not willingly and not completely. He had a federal attorney on speakerphone within 15 minutes of Vasquez's formal caution, and the attorney told him to stop talking, which he mostly did, but the mostly was the important part. In the first 15 minutes, before the attorney arrived on the line, he had said enough. He had confirmed his knowledge of the property. He had attempted to characterize the easement document as classified material that Emily had no authority to possess, which Greer had noted into the record with the precision of someone collecting something valuable. He had made a reference to program pressures that neither denied nor explained the false completion filings. And then his attorney arrived on the line, and the room changed temperature, and Vasquez had the 2 men from the porch brought inside and identified and photographed. And Vance was formally told that he was the subject of a federal investigation and should not leave Ashford Bay without notification. And he sat in Delphine Arsenault's kitchen in his expensive coat, looking at the table with the expression of a man who had believed for a very long time that his position made him untouchable and was now in the process of understanding that positions end. Delphine herself had appeared about 20 minutes into all of this, taken in the room with the calm of a woman who had worked hospice care for 16 years and had seen many versions of human unraveling, put on a second pot of coffee, and returned to her bedroom without a word. Emily stepped outside onto the porch. The rain had eased to a drizzle. She stood where the roof overhang kept it off her and breathed for the first time in what felt like hours. Behind her, through the window, she could hear the procedural machinery of consequence beginning. Greer's voice, precise and building, and Vasquez directing Pell with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this case to land on her desk. 2 additional federal vehicles had pulled onto the property road in the last 30 minutes. A call had been made to the county registrar's office in Ashford Bay, officially flagging the Whitmore Lake transfer and the demolition permit. Mara, in Harwick, had called Emily's phone twice. Emily had let them go to voicemail and texted back, "It's moving, call you tonight," and then had called Greer's office directly and gotten what sounded like a productive conversation going. The machine was turning. Emily's shoulder hurt. She hadn't noticed it until now, which was how it worked. The body held its complaints in a queue and released them when the operational tempo dropped. She'd caught her shoulder on the doorframe in the laundry room corridor last night, running in the dark, and had registered it as information and not pain and moved on. Now it was pain. She pressed her thumb into the muscle and breathed. The porch boards creaked. Olivia came out and stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and looked at the drizzle and the wet property road and the government vehicles. "Is it over?" Olivia asked. "This part," Emily said. "The next part is slower. Evidence review, formal charges, county court hearings on the property transfer." She paused. "It could be months before the house is legally clear." "But the demolition is stopped." "Yes." Olivia nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "He came here himself," she said. "He flew here. He's the regional director of a federal agency, and he got on a plane and came to a farmhouse to try to. She stopped. He was scared. Yes, Emily said. Good, Olivia said. Flat. Not vindictive, just accurate. Ranger appeared at the screen door behind them, looked at them both, and then lay down with his nose to the gap at the base of the door and went to sleep. He's done for the day, Olivia said softly. He's earned it, Emily said. The next 72 hours move the way investigations move when federal jurisdiction creates gravity. Things that had been resisting for months began collapsing inward. The county registrar's office in Ashford Bay, faced with a formal federal fraud flag on the Crestline filings, pulled all related documents under court order within 18 hours. The notary whose stamp appeared on Ruth Carter's forged deed transfer, the woman from Carver County, Rosa Vallejo, whose registration number Emily had found in the online database, was contacted by federal investigators and within 4 hours had provided a signed statement that she had never notarized any document for a Ruth Carter or any Carter family, and that her registration number appeared to have been duplicated on a fraudulent stamp. The attorney, the one from Callaway, Branch & Associates, the one who had represented Olivia briefly and then withdrawn, his connection to Crestline through the registered agent name, Trent Callaway, was now documented in federal case filings, and Trent Callaway retained a criminal defense attorney on the morning of the second day and stopped answering calls, which was, Mara told Emily over the phone, essentially a confirmation in human form. Diana Voss, the woman who had appeared at Mercy General with her smooth voice and her business card, was identified as Crestline's internal operations manager. Federal agents reached her at the Ashford Bay Hotel, where she'd been staying, and she was interviewed for 4 hours. Greer told Vasquez and Vasquez told Emily that Voss had lasted about 90 minutes before the weight of what she was looking at shifted her from protective to cooperative. Emily went back to work. She had 3 days off, technically. She'd called in on the second morning after everything started, explained a family emergency to the charge nurse, and the charge nurse had said take what you need with the efficiency of someone managing a staffing reality rather than offering genuine grace. On the fourth morning, Emily put on her scrubs and drove to Mercy General and walked onto the floor. Hale was at the board. He looked up when she came in and said nothing for a moment that was slightly too long. Brooks? Morning, she said. She pulled the first chart. I heard you had some kind of situation, he said. Not warmly, but without the usual edge of managed annoyance. It's handled. He looked at her for another moment. She waited for him to say something about lanes, about patterns, about the ways in which she consistently operated outside of whatever perimeter he'd decided was hers. He didn't. He turned back to the board. There's a trauma coming in, motorcycle versus guardrail. ETA 8 minutes. I want you in Bay 1. Already moving, she said. The trauma was ugly the way motorcycle accidents are ugly. Not dramatic, just a specific and unforgiving catalog of what happens to a human body when speed and metal intersect. Emily worked alongside the trauma attending, Dr. Yusuf, who was 4 years out of residency and very good, and did not waste words. And the patient, 28 years old, whose name was Danny, and who kept trying to apologize for bleeding on the floor, which Emily found both heartbreaking and very human, was stabilized within 40 minutes. She was cleaning up when Hale appeared at the bay entrance. He looked at the documented treatment sequence on the board. You called the splenetic laceration early, he said. The bruising pattern and his pressure trajectory, Emily said. It was consistent. He made a sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite dismissal, and was somewhere between the two, which for Hale was approximately as close to good call as she'd ever received. She took it for what it was and moved on. The day was the way hospital days were. Relentless in the texture of need, unglamorous in the execution, punctuated by moments that mattered enormously to the specific person at the center of them, and which were then immediately followed by the next specific person. Emily moved through it. She was good at it. She had always been good at it, and the fact that no one on this floor knew why she was good at it, the field triage, the pressure assessment, the ability to read a deteriorating patient before the machines caught up, had never bothered her the way people seemed to expect it should. She had chosen this. The anonymity, the scrubs, the unglamorous proximity to human need without the specific violence that had preceded it. She had chosen it because it was useful, and because she was capable of it, and because it did not require her to be what she had been before, which had also been useful and something she'd been capable of, but which had cost things she didn't spend a lot of time accounting for. Ranger had looked at her in a parking garage, and a soldier had recognized a soldier. She thought about that briefly, between patients. On the fifth day, Vasquez called. Vance has been placed on administrative leave by his department pending the federal investigation, Vasquez said. That's public record as of an hour ago. The press release is going out from the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon. Emily was in the hospital parking lot, on her lunch break, sitting in her car. What about the contractors who came to my building? 2 of them are cooperating, provided the chain of instruction. It goes through a private security firm that Crestline retained, and the instruction to retrieve the documents originated from a call made from Vance's personal cell phone at 10:43 on the night in question. Vasquez paused. That's direct evidence of him personally directing the operation. He called it in himself. He panicked when the first team failed and went around the firm's internal process. His phone record is in the evidence file. Another pause. Emily, I need to tell you something. There's going to be press attention on this case when it goes public today. The federal fraud angle, the military logistics program, the false acquisition records. It's going to get coverage, and Olivia's situation is going to be part of that. Okay? Your name is going to be in it. Emily looked at the hospital entrance. Okay, she said again. When it comes out, the case file includes your service record, not in the press release, but investigators have it. Greer's team has it. And these things, Vasquez stopped. I'm not warning you, I'm telling you, because you deserve to know before it becomes visible. Emily was quiet for a moment. 5 years of careful distance, the yoga mat she'd never used. The employment forms with the careful, technically accurate omissions. What's in the file? She said. Not a question. She knew what was in the file. Your deployment record, your unit designation, your classification as a combat medical specialist, special operations support. Vasquez's voice was measured. And your commendations. There are a lot of them. The hospital parking lot sat in the light of a late afternoon that had cleared after days of rain, and Emily looked at the ordinary gray building where she had spent 3 years taking care of people who didn't know what she'd been before, and felt something that was not quite grief and not quite relief, but lived in the neighborhood of both. All right, she said. All right, Vasquez said. Then after a brief pause, for what it's worth, what you did with those documents, the way you read the program structure, the way you staged the evidence chain and protected the principal without law enforcement backup and kept the whole thing from going sideways on a farm in Graywood, that's not something most people could have done. Emily said nothing for a moment. The injunction is what mattered, she said. Mara got that done. The injunction mattered because you called Mara at the right time and gave her the right documentation and understood what was needed before anyone with a badge was in the room. Vasquez was quiet for a second. Just take it, Brooks. Emily almost smiled. Okay, she said. Thank you. The press coverage broke at 4 p.m., and by 6 it had grown. Emily saw it first on her phone in the break room. A Federal Wire Service item, dry and procedural, headlined, Federal official placed on leave amid military logistics fraud investigation with Vance's name in the second paragraph and Ashford Bay and property fraud in the third. By 7, there was a longer piece from a regional outlet that had found Olivia, or found Olivia adjacent. It referenced the family of a deceased Ashford Bay resident whose property was allegedly fraudulently transferred without naming her, which was appropriate, but which was enough. Emily texted Olivia, "Are you okay?" The reply came back in 2 minutes. "Yes." Delphine made soup. Ranger is sleeping. I'm watching the news. Emily sat with that for a moment. She put her phone away and went back to her patients. Hale found her at shift change. He had his coat on, which meant he was leaving, which was unusual for a man who often appeared to live in the building. He stopped beside her at the nurse's station, and she looked up from the chart she was finishing. "I heard something today," he said. "From someone in administration." He paused. "About why you're the way you are. With patience." He was not a man who chose his words with care, and it showed when he tried. With pressure. Emily waited. "I wanted to say—" He stopped, started again. "You called it right on Harold and on the trauma this morning, and I—" Another stop. He pressed his lips together. "I've been operating under a set of assumptions about your capabilities that I may not have—" He stopped a final time, gave up on the sentence. "I'm saying I may have been wrong about some things." Emily looked at him for a moment. Marcus Hale, who had said you're a nurse, Brooks, in the tone of a ceiling, who had made her professional invisibility a matter of routine, who had been wrong about her in every specific way for 3 years, and knew it now because someone in administration had apparently seen the news coverage and connected the name. She could have let it sit. She could have given him back his own flatness and his own measured distance. "Thank you," she said instead. "I'll see you tomorrow." He nodded. He left. It wasn't enough, and it wasn't nothing, which was probably the most honest accounting of it. She finished the chart. She put on her coat. Her phone rang as she was walking to the parking lot. The number was Sato. "I saw the wire service piece," he said. "Yeah. You okay?" "I'm fine." She unlocked her car. Shoulders sore. "From what?" "Door frame. It's fine." She got in. "Sato, thank you, for Vasquez." "She's good," he said. "She'll do right by this case." A pause. "Emily, I need to tell you something." She heard the shift in his voice and went still. "Vasquez's unit pulled the full operational profile on Crestline today," Sato said. "The financing structure. Who was providing capital for the acquisition operations?" He stopped. "Tell me," Emily said. "The primary investment vehicle behind Crestline Property Holdings," Sato said, "is a holding company registered in Delaware. The holding company has 3 named directors." He paused. 2 of them are corporate names. Standard shell structure. Another pause. "The third is a retired military officer." Emily's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "The officer's name is Colonel Richard Bray," Sato said. "Retired. Fort Delacroix Logistics Division." He stopped. "Emily, Bray was the unit chief of the CID investigative unit before Vasquez, the one who signed off on closing the anomaly flags that Vasquez found when she took over. The parking lot around her was quiet. Evening, the sky going dark at the edges, the ordinary world doing its ordinary things. Emily sat in it and thought about the chain. Vance at the oversight level, Bray at the investigative level, Calloway at the legal level. 3 layers of institutional protection, each one placed precisely to ensure that anything moving upward through legitimate channels would be caught and turned back before it reached anyone who would act on it. "He built a system," she said. "They built a system," Sato said. "Vance and Bray together. Bray retired 8 months before Vance took the directorship. The timing wasn't a coincidence." "No." A pause. "Vasquez doesn't know yet. About Bray. The Delaware registration came back an hour ago and I called you first because Bray would know Vasquez," Emily said. "He was her predecessor. He knows her processes, her contacts, how her unit operates. If he finds out the investigation is open before Vasquez can formally include him in the case, he'll move," Emily said. "Evidence, witnesses, money." "Yeah," Sato said. Emily was already dialing Vasquez on the second phone. It rang twice. "Brooks? Vasquez, I need you to pull a Delaware corporate registration right now," Emily said. "The investment vehicle behind Crestline, 3rd named director. Cross it against your predecessor at the CID unit." A silence. Brief. Then, "Say that again." Emily said it again. The silence on the other end was different this time. Not the silence of confusion, but the silence of a person running connections at speed, looking at the architecture of something she'd been inside without knowing it and understanding what it meant. His name is on the registration, Emily said. Sato just confirmed. Another silence. When Vasquez spoke, her voice was controlled in the way that voices are controlled when what's underneath is not. I need to make a call, she said. A specific call. Tonight. Before... She stopped. Before he finds out you know, Emily said. Yes. A pause. Brooks, if Bray knows the investigation is open, he has contacts in this department. Not many, but some. She was thinking out loud, which meant she trusted Emily enough to let her hear it. I need to move the evidence custodianship tonight, out of the unit database and into a secured federal system he doesn't have access to. How long does that take? 40 minutes if everything works. Do it, Emily said. I'll wait. She sat in the parking lot of Mercy General Hospital in the dark with her phone on her knee and thought about the layers. Vance on administrative leave, Calloway behind a criminal defense attorney, the two contractors cooperating, Diana Voss cooperating, and beneath all of it, the foundation that had been there from the beginning, that had made all of it possible, that had ensured all of it was invisible. A retired colonel whose name was on a Delaware holding company and who had spent 8 months building a retirement before his partner took the directorship and the whole structure went operational. Bray had not appeared anywhere in Olivia's documents. He wasn't at the farmhouse in Graywood. He hadn't called Emily. He hadn't sent anyone to her window or her building because he hadn't needed to. He'd been invisible by design, one layer back from everything visible, his name on a document that existed in a state database that no one had pulled until an hour ago. Emily thought about the phone call from Vance. The people it exposes are not people who accept that quietly. He'd said it like a threat. She'd understood it as information. There were more people than Vance. There had always been more people than Vance. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vasquez. Evidence secured. Making the call now. Stand by. Emily looked at the hospital building, the lights in the windows, the ordinary building doing its ordinary necessary work, floor by floor. She thought about going home. She thought about whether home was currently a sensible destination, given that the shape of this thing had just expanded, given that Bray was somewhere unknown and now time-pressured, given that the two of them, herself and Vasquez, were now the only people who knew that Vasquez's investigation had a layer beneath the layer she'd been looking at. Her phone rang. Vasquez. The call is made, Vasquez said. Her voice was steady but had a quality Emily associated with people who had just had the ground shift under them and were managing the adjustment in real time. Federal Prosecutor's Office. They're opening a parallel case file tonight on Bray separate from the Vance investigation. She paused. Emily. My contact at the prosecutor's office told me something. Tell me. Bray landed at Ashford Bay Regional Airport, Vasquez said. 40 minutes ago. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. He wasn't on any manifest we were watching because we didn't know to watch for him, Vasquez continued. He flew private. Small aircraft, filed a flight plan under a charter company name. A pause. Emily. His last known address in Ashford Bay is a property he owns jointly, a property that shares a surveyor's line with the Whitmore Lake parcel. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. He wasn't just an investor. He wasn't just a retired officer protecting a financial interest from a distance. He was a neighbor. He had property adjacent to the Whitmore Lake house. He had looked at that ridge and that easement corridor from his own land and understood its value and had built everything. Vance, Crestline, the forged deed, the suppressed investigations, all of it, from the vantage point of a man who had stood on his own porch and looked at Ruth Carter's land and decided to take it. He's going to the property, Emily said. We have to move, Vasquez said. Yes, Emily said. We do. She started the car. She drove fast, but not recklessly, which was a distinction she'd learned to maintain in conditions where the difference between the two determined outcomes. Vasquez was already coordinating on the federal channel. Emily could hear it through the phone propped on her dash, the clipped back and forth of people repositioning resources at speed. And the night outside the windshield was clear and cold. The rain finally finished. The road to Whitmore Lake running east through the ridgeline with the particular emptiness of rural roads after dark. She called Olivia from the car. Where are you? Emily said when Olivia answered. Still at Delphine's. Why, what? Stay there. Don't go to the lake house tonight. Don't go anywhere. She kept her voice level. There's a development. It's being handled. But I need you to stay where you are until I call you. A pause. Emily, what development? Someone connected to Crestline has property adjacent to yours. He landed in Ashford Bay tonight. She paused at the junction and took the East Fork without slowing. He knows the investigation is open. We think he's going to the property. To do what? Emily thought about a man who had stood on his own land looking at a ridge and a corridor and had built an entire criminal architecture around acquiring it. A man who had placed himself at the investigative level specifically to suppress any line of inquiry that reached him. A man who had, until an hour ago, been completely invisible. I don't know, she said honestly. That's why I'm going. Emily, stay with Delphine. I'll call you. She ended the call. The lake road opened up ahead and she could see the property, the tree line, the long dark shape of the house against the water, and beyond it the ridge, and beyond that the distant ambient glow of the city. The house had no lights on. The demolition permit was frozen, the transfer flagged, and the house sat as it had sat for 31 years, unchanged and waiting. And there, on the gravel pull-off at the edge of the property line, was a vehicle. Dark. Small. A rental probably, or a charter car. Parked the way people park when they don't intend to be seen, which meant half behind the tree line and without lights. Emily pulled up short of it and cut her own lights and sat for a moment. She texted Vasquez. Vehicle on site. I'm at the property. Where are you? The reply came in 40 seconds. 8 minutes out. Do not engage alone. Emily looked at the house. She looked at the vehicle. She got out of the car. She was not engaging. She was establishing a position, which was different, and which she understood in the specific muscular way of someone for whom the distinction had been trained into the body, rather than reasoned out by the mind. She moved along the tree line, staying out of the open, and came around the north side of the property where the easement corridor ran, the strip of land described in that classified document, the actual physical geography that all of this had been built to control. And she found him there. Richard Bray was 64 years old and built like someone who had been physically formidable and had carried the memory of it into an age where it was mostly posture. He was standing at the edge of the corridor, at the point where the Carter property line met the ridge tree line, with a flashlight in one hand and what looked like a surveying stake in the other. And he was looking at the ground with the expression of a man who was doing something he'd planned to do and was angry that he had to do it this way, hurried, at night, with everything collapsing around him. He was placing a marker, a surveying stake, in the ground, on the Carter property, on the corridor line. Emily understood what she was looking at in about 3 seconds. He was trying to establish a physical record of a boundary claim, something that could be used in a subsequent legal challenge to muddy the property line, to create a dispute about the corridor that would slow the federal case even if the fraud charges went through. It was a small, ugly, desperate act. The act of a man who had spent 22 months operating at altitude and was now scrambling at ground level. She stepped out of the tree line. "Colonel Bray," she said. He spun. The flashlight came up and found her face, and she let it, because she had nothing to hide and he had everything to hide, and that asymmetry mattered. He stared at her for a moment. He was breathing hard, which was partly the cold and partly something else. "Who the hell are you?" "Emily Brooks," she said. "I'm the person who found the easement document." Something moved across his face. Recognition, recalculation, the particular expression of a man who had expected his name to stay buried for at least another 24 hours and was now understanding it hadn't. "You're the nurse," he said, like it was an accusation. "Yes," she said, "and you're tampering with a federal crime scene while under active investigation." She looked at the stake in his hand. "I'd put that down." He didn't put it down. He looked at her the way men look at interference when they've spent a career being the most senior person in every room. "You have no idea what you've stepped into," he said. "This program, this corridor, the infrastructure implications alone. I know what the program is," Emily said. "I know what the corridor is. I know what the false acquisition filings are, and I know what your name is on the Delaware registration, and I know you were the unit chief who closed the anomaly flags before your partner took the directorship." She held his gaze in the dark. "I know all of it. So does the federal prosecutor's office. So does Major Vasquez's CID unit. So does the U.S. attorney. She paused. The evidence was moved to a secured federal system tonight, Colonel. There's no version of this where a surveying stake helps you. He looked at her for a long moment. The flashlight was still up, still on her face, and she let it stay there. Behind him, through the trees, she could see the water of Whitmore Lake. Flat, dark, still. And above it the ridge, and the corridor that a dying woman had unknowingly owned and a retired colonel had decided he was entitled to. You should have left this alone, he said. His voice had lost the authority tone. What was under it was tired and mean. A man in a parking garage told me the same thing about a woman and a dog, Emily said. It didn't work then either. Headlights swept across the property road, then more headlights. The sound of vehicles, multiple, coming fast and then stopping with professional precision, and the specific quality of movement that followed. Doors, feet, the clipped communication of people who knew what they were doing and where they were going. Vasquez came around the north side of the house, with Pell behind her, and two federal agents Emily hadn't seen before, and she took in the scene, Bray, the stake, Emily standing 8 feet from him in the dark, in about 2 seconds, and said, "Colonel Bray?" Federal agents, "Do not move." He didn't move. He stood there with the surveying stake in his hand and the flashlight dropping slowly toward the ground as the agents came up on either side of him. And he looked at Emily one more time with an expression that was not fear exactly, but was the thing adjacent to fear that people feel when the structure they've built collapses and they have to stand in the rubble without anything to stand behind. "Hands," one of the agents said. Bray put the stake down. He put his hands up. The flashlight fell onto the grass and its beam pointed sideways, illuminating a strip of the easement corridor. The actual ground, the actual grass, the actual piece of land that Ruth Carter had owned and tended and left to her daughter without knowing what it meant to the wrong people. Vasquez cuffed him herself. Emily thought that was probably intentional. The formal arrest of Richard Bray happened at 9:47 on a Wednesday night on the edge of a lake property in Ashford Bay, and by Thursday morning, it was in the Federal Wire. By Thursday afternoon, it was everywhere else. Vance's administrative leave converted to a formal arrest by Friday. The charges were substantial: federal contract fraud, false acquisition filings, obstruction, conspiracy. And the U.S. Attorney's Office in Harwick held a press conference that Emily watched on her phone in the break room at Mercy General between patients, in which Greer, who had the pleased precision of someone who had found exactly the case he'd been building toward, laid out the architecture of what Vance and Bray had constructed together and how it had been dismantled. Trent Calloway was indicted the following week. His law firm was dissolved pending the investigation. Diana Voss received a cooperation agreement that reduced her exposure significantly in exchange for her complete accounting of Crestline's operations, which she provided in writing over 37 pages. The county registrar's office in Ashford Bay formally voided the deed transfer on the Whitmore Lake property 11 days after Bray's arrest. Olivia Carter received official written notification that the property was hers, unencumbered, as it had always been. Emily was at work when Olivia texted her the photo of the letter. She looked at it for a long moment in the break room. The official county letterhead, the formal language, the property address, Olivia's name, and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for 2 weeks. Not triumph, quieter than that. Something more like the particular satisfaction of a thing being made right, which was different from winning and which felt better. She typed back, "Go see the house." The reply came an hour later. Not words, just a photo of the lake, taken from the porch, in the afternoon light, with Ranger's gray muzzle visible at the bottom of the frame where he'd come to stand beside her. 3 weeks after that, there was a hearing. Emily had not expected to testify in person. Mara had prepared her for a written statement, which Greer had indicated would be sufficient. But the federal judge overseeing the preliminary proceedings, a woman named Judge Aldana, who had the focused patience of someone who had seen every version of what people were capable of and had not been made cynical by it, requested Emily's direct testimony, and Emily went. The courtroom was not cinematic. It was a middle-sized federal room with fluorescent lighting and wooden benches and the specific atmosphere of institutional seriousness that is neither dramatic nor cold, but is simply what the machinery of consequence looks like in practice. Vance was present at the defense table in a suit that was still expensive, but that he wore differently now, without the weight of untouchability behind it. Bray was present separately, with his own counsel, and he did not look at Emily when she was sworn in. She testified for 40 minutes. She described what she'd found in the documents, how she'd found it, what she'd done with it. She described the notary discrepancy, the false filing dates, the classified easement document, and how she'd recognized its format. She described the people who'd come through her window and the vehicles staged outside her building. She described Bray at the property line with the surveying stake. She answered questions from Greer's team with the same flat precision she brought to everything. And she answered questions from the defense attorneys with the same quality. And at one point, the defense attorney for Vance suggested that her background gave her an unusual and perhaps biased interpretation of the military logistics document. And Judge Aldana looked at the attorney with the expression of someone who had asked a question about the document's classification header and received an answer that indicated he understood it less well than the nurse he was questioning, and moved on. When Emily stepped down, Vasquez, who was seated in the gallery, gave her a single nod. Emily nodded back. Outside the courthouse, in the ordinary afternoon of an ordinary city street, Mara was waiting. Mara was short and efficient and had the quality of someone who did not waste motion, and she had filed the injunction in the dark of an early morning on very little information and a favor owed, and she handed Emily a coffee from the shop on the corner and said, "You did well in there." "You did well first," Emily said. Mara made a brief, dismissive sound. "That's what favors are for." She looked at the courthouse entrance. "What happens to you now?" "With the service record?" Emily drank the coffee. "Vasquez's case file has it. The court record has it. It's not secret anymore." She paused. "It was never really secret. I just didn't advertise it." "Are you okay with that?" Emily thought about Marcus Hale in the hospital parking lot, saying, "I may have been wrong about some things in the halting way of a man discovering humility at an age when it no longer came naturally." She thought about Dr. Lena Park, who had listened when Emily flagged the developing bleed, and about Harold, who had apologized for bleeding on the floor. She thought about the break room and the 12-hour shifts and the specific unglamorous usefulness of being able to read a deteriorating patient before the machines caught up. She thought about the 5 years she'd spent building a quiet life, and how it had turned out, in the end, not to be something she'd built by hiding what she was, but by being all of it simultaneously. The soldier and the nurse, the tactician and the caregiver, the person who recognized a classified document header, and the person who stayed 3 minutes over her shift to make sure Harold was stable. "Yeah," she said. "I'm okay with it." The Whitmore Lake House took Olivia 2 months to reopen. Not because of structural damage. Crestline had never gotten close enough to do physical harm to the building. But because 31 years of a family's existence in a place requires something more than a legal document to return to. It requires the slower work of going back through rooms and deciding what they mean now, which is not a simple process and is not supposed to be. Emily helped on 3 Saturdays. She was not a gifted home restorer. She was competent with practical repairs and patient with the kind of work that required sustained attention, which covered most of it. Ranger supervised from a patch of afternoon sun on the porch, moving when the sun moved, with the unhurried dignity of an animal who had earned his rest and intended to take it fully. On the 3rd Saturday, they sat on the porch in the late afternoon, the lake in front of them going gold, and then darker gold, and then the particular blue of early evening, and Olivia said, "I've been thinking about what to do with it." "The house?" "The property." Olivia had a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, just holding. "My mother used to say this place should be used. She hated the idea of property sitting. Land should do something, she used to say." A pause. "There are veterans programs, first responder support networks, residential retreat programs, short-term, low-cost, somewhere quiet for people who need quiet." She looked at the lake. "This is quiet." Emily looked at the water. The ridge behind them, the corridor through the tree line, the easement that had been a federal acquisition target and a corrupt man's ambition and a dying woman's unknowing legacy. "It would be a lot of work," Emily said. "Yes," Olivia said. "I know." Ranger shifted in his sun patch and put his chin on his paws and exhaled slowly, the long, satisfied exhale of an old dog in warmth. "I think your mother would have liked it," Emily said. Olivia was quiet for a moment. She would have had opinions about the kitchen, she said, which was not a contradiction. Emily almost laughed. It came out as something quieter, warmer. She let it. Sit. The formal recognition came in a letter. Not the federal case commendation, which arrived first and which was official and appropriate, and which Emily filed in the fireproof bag beside everything else. Not the county's public acknowledgement, which was brief and bureaucratic and mentioned her name in the third paragraph. The letter that mattered was from Fort Delacroix, from the commanding officer of the Logistics Division, written on official stationery and signed by hand. It said, in part, that her identification and preservation of classified program documentation under adverse conditions and her coordination with federal investigators in a manner consistent with her prior service designation had materially contributed to the uncovering of a fraud that had operated undetected within the program for over a year. It said that her service record, now a matter of court documentation, reflected a level of training and commendation that the division wished formally to acknowledge. It used the word distinguished 3 times, which Emily found slightly excessive and which she did not mention to anyone. She read the letter once standing at her kitchen counter in the morning before her shift, and then folded it and put it in the bag with the rest. She went to work. The floor was the same floor it had always been. The board, the cases, the specific relentless need of people who were having the worst days of their lives and had arrived here to have someone competent deal with what was wrong. Hale was at the board. He looked up when she came in and said, "Brooks?" And she said, "Morning." And he held her gaze for a moment and then said, "Bay 3 has a presentation I want your read on before the attending gets in." She went to Bay 3. The patient was a 41-year-old woman named Greta, who was in the particular sustained terror of someone whose body had done something alarming and who had not yet been told what it was. Emily reviewed the initial workup, looked at the monitor, asked Greta 3 questions in a row with the directness that patients either found reassuring or alarming, and which Greta, who was practical and frightened in equal measure, found reassuring. "I think it's your heart," Emily said. "Not the dramatic kind, the manageable kind. But we're going to get cardiology in here and we're going to take care of it." Greta looked at her. "You're sure? About needing cardiology?" "Yes." "About the rest?" "That's what we're here to find out." She put her hand briefly on the woman's forearm. "You're in the right place." It was a simple thing to say. It was the truest thing available at that moment, and Emily had long ago decided that the truest available thing was usually better than the more sophisticated option. She stepped out of the bay. The floor was doing what floors did. Down the corridor, Lena Park was moving toward a pediatric case with the focused speed of someone who knew what was needed and was going to provide it. The overhead system announced something routine. The day was starting. Emily thought about Ranger on the porch in the afternoon sun, moving when the light moved, too old for heroics and entirely uninterested in anything less than his full presence. She thought about a $10 sign on the back of a cereal box and the parking garage, and the 2 men who had stepped closer and found something in the path that they hadn't accounted for. She thought about the thing nobody had asked her directly, which was whether she regretted the 5 years of careful distance, the omissions on the forms, the quiet life built with deliberate hands, whether she would do it differently. The answer was no, and it wasn't complicated. She had needed what that time had given her: the floor, the patience, the specific unglamorous practice of being useful without being seen. It had not been hiding. It had been the work. And the work had been real, and it had made her someone who could walk into a parking garage on an ordinary morning and recognize a line that needed to be held and hold it. What people had missed when they looked at her, what Hale had missed, what the men in the parking garage had missed, what Vance and Bray and all their careful architecture had missed, wasn't her service record, wasn't the commendations or the deployment history or the classification level that sat in Vasquez's case file. What they'd missed was simpler than that. What they'd missed was attention. The sustained, unglamorous daily practice of seeing what was actually there, in a patient's bruising pattern, in a document's format, in a tired woman crouching against a wall while an old dog held a line. The ones who underestimate you are counting on you to perform invisibility permanently. They're counting on the exhaustion of being overlooked to eventually become your own limitation. What they can't account for is the person who absorbs the dismissal, learns the room, reads the documents, and acts. Not loudly, not with announcement, but with the specific unhurried certainty of someone who has always known exactly what they were capable of and was simply waiting for the moment to matter. Emily picked up the next chart. She went to work, and across the city, on a porch over a lake that a dying woman had left to her daughter, Olivia Carter sat with an old dog in the afternoon sun and looked at water that still belonged to her, in a house that was still standing, in a life that had been stolen and returned. And Ranger put his gray head in her lap and breathed slowly and steadily, the way things breathe when they are exactly where they are supposed to be. Some people wear their courage visibly. They carry rank and title and the external architecture of who they are, and the world organizes around it. And then there are the others, the ones standing quietly in a parking garage on a Tuesday morning, the ones who notice the thing that doesn't fit, who read the document that wasn't meant for them, who move through the fire, not because they're not afraid, but because they have spent enough time in difficult places to know that fear and action are not mutually exclusive. Nobody saw Emily Brooks coming. That was always the point, and that, in the end, was enough.